You ready, Charlie?
I'm ready.
Yeah, I think I'm ready. Okay. Should we lead with this?
Sure.
Nah, save it for later. All right, you ready, Zach?
I'm ready to rock and roll when you guys are.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Trap House Podcast. We got a great guest today. Zachary Hanson's with us. How's it going?
Fan freaking tastic. Right before we got on, I was telling you guys that I'm alive, I'm above ground, and that's my measure of success. So we're doing pretty great today, especially for a Monday.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and let everyone know you sent this book that you put out, Turning for how many years is this out now? It's been a couple.
Almost it's actually two
Yeah,
this come like October 18th, I think was the release date. So we're coming up on the 2 year anniversary somehow. Feels like yesterday.
Yeah.
yeah. That's crazy that you sent that out that long ago, and I was like, we wanted you on the podcast. It never really worked out, and just you know how it is with timing and everything. And here we are now.
Hey,
So
better late than never.
yeah,
So I guess we should mention too. So this is like a dual podcast for the okayest podcast as well, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, when we reached out, I mean, I was pumped that we were able to get this going on. But for listeners, I also have a podcast around trapping, mostly focused on newer trappers called the Okayest Trapper. So we figured we'd get together, have you guys run this, and then I'll be releasing the same episode on my platform too, just to kind of help get reach for both of us, the Trap House and the Okayest Trapper.
Sure.
yeah. We should start there.
What's
What's the
that?
the okayest? What is that exactly?
Yeah, I'm happy to chat about that. So, you know, the book came out 2 years ago, and that was about 4 or 5 years into my trapping saga. I'm an adult onset hunter trapper, didn't get started till my late 20s. Um, but as time progressed, the book came out, the book saw some success. Um, I follow on social media, typical millennial thing, the Okayest Hunter, which is a brand that is really focused on the ethos of not taking yourself too seriously. And they've done a really good job of growing, like if you're out hunting for meat, you hunt for meat. If you want a trophy, you get a trophy. Whatever it is, just kind of don't be a douchebag about it. That's kind of the ethos.
Yeah,
And which I resonate with because I was learning and everything else. But they've started to build out a network of podcasts. They have the Okayest Hunter podcast, which is their flagship. And they've built out other ones for adult onset hunters, upland bird hunters, all with that same ethos of wanting to learn and be the best, but not being too serious about it. So
Yeah.
the guy who founded that reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, I've been following your trapping, career through social media, blah blah blah." He's like, "Do you have any interest in doing a podcast as the okayest trapper, right? Somebody who's pretty okay at it, but definitely no expert." And selfishly, and one of the reasons like we're talking, I have used this as an outlet to try to beat down the never-ending learning curve of trapping by having the opportunity to have a platform to talk to people who are just way smarter than me, way better at trapping than me, and get little tips and tricks that I can put together on my trap line. So that's the origin of the Okayest Trapper and really the meaning behind it, which is we're all here to learn and just not to take yourself too serious. Like be serious about the outcome, but not serious about, every little thing and, being too pedantic, I guess.
yeah.
I mean
I
that.
like that.
Yeah, me too. And that's a lot of people need to take a note on that. Well,
Well,
or
that makes it keeps it fun when you do it that way. If you
right.
start turning, things into everything, everyday life turns into so serious. It's this, that, or the other. It's business driven, and then it's not as cool.
Well, they're just the phone call that we get all the time is like they're walking right by my sets, or it's been 2 weeks and I haven't caught anything, and then it's like, what am I doing wrong? And they're like, they're whatever. So just roll with it. It'll eventually come together. So
Yeah, I think that idea of like the never stopping to learn and frankly like giving yourself grace. Like I'm a competitive person. I was an athlete, still am, like I whether it's jujitsu, I was a wrestler doing ultra marathons. Like I always have had a competitive mindset, but as we get older, as we try new things, like there's a little bit of giving yourself grace to screw up. Like you said, like when you have, things going by your set multiple times, you're like, why is this not connecting? Like that ability to just step back and be like, It's not that I suck necessarily. Maybe it is. In my case, it is sometimes. But, you know, that it's just part of the process. And I think people get so focused on the outcome, like whether it's like catching that coyote or catching whatever it is, that you lose sight of that fun part and you make it a more of a job than it maybe needs to be. It can really suck the fun out of it.
Right, right, exactly. So, I mean, a lot of us are driven to succeed and want to succeed, but then there's this fine line that, where, I can relate it to some deer hunters that we do taxidermy as well. So, we'll have guys that'll go out and just kill a really, really nice deer, and they're
They're not happy with it.
they're not happy with it, or they get the score back on it and it didn't score like what they thought it was going to be, and it's just like, it's like just get in the truck and drive off a cliff. I mean, just what?
Yeah.
It's like it's a beautiful deer. It's an awesome set of antlers. It's just because it didn't have a numerical,
I mean, I can change the paperwork for you.
Yeah,
We can add
so-
a couple digits or something.
But anyways, yeah, it's just kind of roll with it and have a good time. And
But there's nothing
enjoy it.
wrong with that. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that either. Like if you are a hunter who's out there looking for numbers and that brings you joy, that's great. I'd argue that there are probably fewer of those people who are really deriving joy or maybe robbing themselves of that when they come in and it's a quarter inch shy of what they thought it was going to be.
Right.
And then that's thrown away. It's like, oh, that was not worth my time.
Right.
I mean, if you're driven by the trophies, great. I'm all for it. Same with trapping. But there's that balance you got to find where, if that's the only thing you're holding on to, what are you depriving yourself of? And if it's a 160-inch buck and you come back at 159 3/4 and all of a sudden it's not good enough for you, I'd argue that might be a little bit of a thing we need to work on from a personality perspective. But that's me.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. So Zach, you've got a very interesting story. So, and it's not, I guess, not super unusual by today's standards, but I mean, you kind of made this life changing, and I'm assuming you probably work remotely now, but you can kind of tell us about some of your background, which your listeners have probably all heard it, but ours haven't necessarily. So.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's not a story that is maybe as unique as it was 5 or 6 years ago, and I
Right.
think that's a good thing. But the story really is, I grew up in a suburban environment, not necessarily by choice. It was just my environment. This is what I was born into. My parents didn't hunt. My grandparents didn't hunt. You had to go back 3 generations, despite growing up in Georgia in the South, before my family had to hunt for sustenance back in the Great Depression. So it was just not something that was familial, meaning like my family didn't do it, so I didn't do it. And growing up, I had friends who hunted, but it just never grabbed me for whatever reason. And it wasn't until I followed the path, right? The path that was laid out for a lot of my generation, which was it's college or bust, right? It was that idea of like, don't do trades, go to college, take on this huge debt with this high interest rate. That's your key to success. Go do that.
Yep.
And
I'm
frankly,
over
yeah, I bought it hook, line, and sinker. Like I had no, at the time, like exposure to other things to give me a reason to question it. And so I went down that path. I took the high interest loans. I got the degree that frankly held no value, especially when I graduated from university right during the peak of the recession in 2008. There was nothing there. But my cognitive dissonance, I always refer to it like being in a death cult. You have this follower, or you're a follower, you have this guy or gal who's like, the end of the world is going to happen on this date. And you believe it for whatever reason, you believe it. You're marching along, you're following, and all of a sudden that date comes. And all of a sudden you're still alive. And you start to have that break in your mind. You're like, wait a second, this guy told me that this was going to happen on this date and it didn't. And you've got 2 options at that point. You could be smart, unlike me, and say, oh, this was all a sham. Let me go a different direction. Or you can do what happens to most people, which is where cognitive dissonance comes into place, and your brain goes, you know what? Instead of looking at the obvious, I'm going to double down and put my
Yep.
heels in the ground and say, yeah, I'm going to actually believe more. Like, this was just a little blip on the radar. And that's what happened to me. So I was like, you know what? The answer to my problem's not becoming more adept with my actual natural surroundings and understanding what provides me food, shelter, water, and maybe working in the trades. It's going to be doubling down and actually taking more loans and getting more education, like a dummy. So I did it. And, I feel like, looking back, I'm like, who was the dunce? It was me, 100%. But I did that. And eventually I was able to eke out a career. I finally like bullied my way into a job at IBM, and I kind of went down this path of technology careers. But what happened is 6 or 7 years into that career, I realized I had the house, I had the car. I didn't know how to fix anything. And the most eye-opening piece for me is I was with my ex-wife and I was sitting there thinking about, uh, whether it's end of times or like a real crisis scenario. We lived in Louisiana. We always had hurricanes coming through. And I thought to myself, like, if everything went down, we don't have a generator, I don't have anything to get us out of this situation. And when I took my ego aside, like, I was a tough guy, like doing wrestling, jiu-jitsu, like I felt tough. But when I looked at the things objectively, if all that happened, we would probably die in a real crisis scenario because I don't know how to gut a deer. I don't know how to trap anything. I don't know how to provide clean water. I always thought like I would have to literally get in my car, drive down I-10 and hope that I hit a deer. And not knowing how to do anything, I'd have to build a fire, throw that sucker on top and hope I could pull something edible off because I don't know any of it. And that was like my epiphany. And as luck would have it, I went through a divorce pretty soon after that. And that was like my, opportunity to say, hey, I have all these deficiencies that my upbringing just didn't value for whatever reason. And I have to fix that. And that's what sent me on the trajectory. That's what started the book, but and my trapping and hunting career. But it was the learning curve steep. But that's the origin stories. Is I just had no idea, and I think there's so many people out there like that who maybe they won't admit it, but again, they have that thought deep in the recesses of their brain of if stuff hits the fan, like their kids are gonna die, they're gonna die, their spouse is gonna die, and that's scary.
Yeah,
that is true fear.
Yeah. I think obviously with the current things going on with the Hurricane Helen relief, and in some of those cases, it didn't matter if you were prepared or had those abilities or not. People have died. It's very unfortunate, So, but yeah, but there's lots of people that are left that, I mean, they're struggling to survive on a daily basis. So, but yeah, it's
it's scary. But it's the reality we're living in, and you see the blips in the radar. The grid going down in Texas a couple years ago in the winter. COVID, nobody can buy toilet paper right now. You can't buy toilet paper. Like it's so obvious that there is a stopping point somewhere that's going to happen that we all have to be prepared for. And the majority of the world, or the United States at least, is not prepared for that. I was one of those people.
Yeah.
And thankfully now I'm not. I feel pretty comfortable. I'm still learning, like technicality, like when we get into the trapping conversation, like I still suck, but I'm better than people who don't know how to put a trap on the ground.
Yeah.
And that's an advantage.
Yeah.
So you basically made this life-changing deal and just uprooted everything and went to Idaho is where you're at, right?
Yeah, so I'm very lucky in a lot of regards. Like I didn't have any children with my ex-wife, so it was a very amicable split. But I had been dabbling at that point. I had been dabbling in Louisiana, like becoming what I would say is hunt curious. I wanted to understand where food was coming from, so I picked up a bow, 2 inches too short on a draw length. It was a buddy's old bow. Started learning to shoot. Went on a few hunts. Actually, had harvested my first deer in Tennessee out of a tree stand in 2018 or 2019. And then went through the divorce. And I was like, where should I go? Like, of course, when you're learning these things, and we're very fortunate in our time, like YouTube, looking at you guys, looking at, Coon Creek Outfitters, looking at Remy Warren or whoever the person was that's doing all these big hunts. I'm like, man, like there's so much more to this world that I don't know. Where should I go? And so I just pointed my car north and drove to Idaho and started looking at properties and landed in a little town, which is actually the smallest town in the lower 48 accessible by road. We live in a town of 35 people at the end of an 80-mile dirt road, and it's got every single game species I could hunt or trap that I'd want to. I was like, I'm going to go where the animals are and then learn. And that's exactly what it happened.
That's awesome.
That's very cool that you're able to do that and have the desire to do that. And like, and I think, like I said, I think COVID brought a lot of that out in people that
Yeah, a lot of people.
they just all of a sudden realize that maybe I can't do something socially with other people, but I can certainly get outside and be active in hunting, trapping, fishing, or whatever, but other outdoor pursuits. But yeah, and I think Zach, it's interesting, and this started prior to COVID. The R3 program basically, is to set up to develop new people to the outdoors, kind of like yourself, that maybe they have the financial means, they have the time that available to them, but they just are completely overwhelmed, bewildered on a starting point, So there's definitely a need out there for that, and and people like yourself and others that didn't grow up with it, weren't around with, that need that boost or that start or just some confidence to get going. And of course, you took it on yourself, but yeah, so.
What was interesting too, I mean, I agree, like the R3 program's great. I've been trying to be involved with like the First Hunt Foundation as well to kind of give back and bring other people along. And it's so interesting to me when you think about like hunting and trapping, right? I got into this because of hunting and the desire to provide food. Trapping wasn't on my radar when I came out to Idaho. Frankly, I still, like when I came to Idaho 6-7 years ago, I still had the caricature in my mind of, the old school trap that, if you ask a lay person what trapping is, they describe it with teeth and stuff. Like that was my understanding too. I had zero concept, never been exposed to trapping in my life. It wasn't until I moved out to Idaho, specifically that small town, where I was focused on big game hunting, specifically with a bow. And I was talking to some old timers in the town, and they're like, "How'd your hunting season going?" I'm like, "Oh, got this, sucked at this." And they're like, "Well, what are you doing to get better?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm doing my fitness program. I'm shooting my bow every day." And they're just kind of chuckling. They're like, "Well, that helps, right? It definitely doesn't hurt you." They're like, "But what are you doing about time in the woods?" I'm like, "Well, I'm scouting right before the season, all the typical stuff." They're like, "Well, why aren't you trapping?" I'm like, "What, with that, jaw thing to, indiscriminately catch an animal?" And they're like, "Son, sit down." Like they took me by my shoulders and sat me down and be like, "I knew you were a moron, but like, okay, let's have this conversation." And it happened like that. And it was somebody putting their arm around me and saying, if you really are pursuing hunting and you want to be better at hunting, here's the secret. Here's the special sauce to get you there. In Idaho, you have a few critters you can chase year round. A lot of the other critters you can chase year round with trapping are critters that are going to be outside of the big game hunting seasons that you're already doing. And by doing that, you are going to become an exponentially better hunter more quickly, because you're going to be spending more time out in the woods and understanding multiple different animal patterns and behaviors, some that cross over and many that are running in the same areas. And it was, that light bulb moment. I didn't know it existed. And, somebody sat there and was like, "Hey, this is an offset jaw. This is this and that." It's very ethical. There's swivels built in, there's springs, and here's the conservation benefits you had no idea about. And it was like this Pandora's box that was opened up, and it hooked me, literally. Or maybe I could say it trapped me, right? Safely.
Yeah.
But it trapped me. And
It restrained you.
exactly. Exactly right. And that was it. That was all it took. And the pathway after that was obviously YouTube, and I write about it in the book, but talking to them, I'm like, "Well, I'm going to go buy traps." And so I went to our local trap supply store, which, 4-hour drive away, but it's Rocky Mountain Fireworks and Fur, Caldwell, Idaho. Shout
Yeah.
out to um, but it's like a movie. You walk into their place and it's like on the side of the highway, exactly how you'd imagine it, giant flashy colors for a fireworks store. And you walk in, you see some furs hanging up, but it's all fireworks. And I walk up and there's this nice lady, at the cash register, and I'm asking around, like, do you guys have trap and stuff? She's like, oh, you're a trapper. I'm like, lie and say, yeah. Wasn't really a trapper yet, but she's like, okay. And it was like a secret society. She's like,
Yeah.
come with me. And she ferried me out of the building, and they have a separate connex that is all their trapping stuff. And as somebody who had just heard about it, understood the benefits now, but wanted to get, into it, she like practically put her arm around me, this old lady, and she walked me over to this other connex. And that first time she opened that door and that smell hit me, damn near knocked me out. But that was like that first exposure, like, okay, like this is a different world. And walking in there and like this wonderful lady's like, well, what are you after? What are you looking to do? And I was explaining it and she set me up. And again, like I'm saying all of this to say the other thing that's been interesting about trapping, different than hunting as a new person coming in, has been overall, not always, we can talk about that too, the acceptance and mentorship that trappers want to give people who are either new or other trappers. Like it is night and day difference between the hunting community and trapping community. Like it has been an overwhelming, like, welcoming scenario. There's pockets of like not that,
Yeah.
but overall, like trappers, you guys, if I reached out, people would be not only answering, but picking up the phone and calling me or FaceTiming me or whatever the case, and take a video of what you're doing. Oh, you did that wrong. Or, and never in a negative way, but in a way to build you up and say, like, we need more trappers. And I think that was an extremely refreshing experience for me, which I'm sure you guys have seen hand over fist too.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that definitely has evolved over time, because clearly back in the 70s when I first started, a lot of guys were tight-lipped about it, and it wasn't, the information wasn't out there by any means, and that was well before the internet and et cetera. But it's gradually gotten better, and a lot of that I think started with like the trappers associations having their fall or spring get-togethers and people doing demos, and and then of course when YouTube came out, and I mean, it's all out there. I mean, there's no secrets at all, but yeah, that has definitely been a very positive development, I suppose, in this whole thing, is just this availability of anybody that wants to give you advice. They're out there. Now, some of it you may not want to take, but
Yeah, you're gonna take some of the YouTube stuff with a grain of salt
but
sometimes.
but yeah, it's out there, so it's not, there's no secrets. So
Well, since this is a dual podcast too, like I want to flip the script a little bit and also understand like how both of you were first. Like one of the questions I always ask, because like my podcast is also focused a lot more on the stories versus like the tactical,
sure.
Stuff. But like, where did both of you get your first exposure to trapping? Obviously, you were saying back in the fur boom, back in the 70s, but has this been something that's been lifelong for both of you?
You should start.
So when I first started, I was I guess about 14. I need to really kind of pin that down. And basically, my friend and I, we would have lived out in the country, and we spent a lot of time at the creek, and we were staying in minnows or fishing or whatever. And um, we had found some traps that the trapper had actually forgot to pick up or lost or whatever. We had found a couple of them, and just didn't even know how to set them. And some older guy at one time showed us how to set them, so we decided we're gonna start trapping. And it was like, yeah, we knew you could sell it, but that certainly wasn't the driving force behind it. It was just like we want to go see if we could catch critters. And that, I think the first year we trapped, we caught 3 muskrats and a possum, and that was like this being very diligent. Literally every day of the season, we were out there. Had absolutely no idea by what we were doing, obviously, and we just kept on it, and then ran into the following year. We were on a family vacation, and we stopped by this park. They had a lake, etc. And on the counter was a Ed Bauer Fur Company catalog, which was I didn't, I knew that kind of stuff was around a little bit from outdoor magazines like for, Field and Stream, et cetera, but it was never advertised heavily in that. And I wasn't familiar with Fur Fish and Game yet. So, anyways, picked up the catalog, long story short, ordered some stuff, got some little EJ Daily books, which are very small, but that was and that was in my budget and that was what was available at the time. And just kind of went from there. And then I met a more experienced trapper and rode with him for a while and just kind of, and then things snowballed, and I guess my entrepreneurial side led me to start selling trapping supplies and buying fur when I was a senior in high school, and then it just kind of been here ever since. So.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Crazy.
it's an interesting thing. Like when I talk to most people, like it's interesting you didn't have a gap. Like it seemed like most people I talked to started out trapping, maybe took a little bit of a break, whether that was to go pursue a career in something and then always coming back to it and then launching. So
Right.
I feel like you're a little unique in that it was from the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, of course, been in business 48 years or whatever. So long, long time. And it's pretty cool to see people that, as the gap that you mentioned, which is very common, now bringing their grandkids in, the second or third generation, they want to at least introduce them to it. And so that, and a lot of them I still remember or recognize from way back when, so it is neat to kind of see that come full circle. But
yeah, I bet you're one of the rare ones that really has that backwards vision, like because you never left.
Yeah.
That you get to really see the growth and trajectory, the ups and the downs, which we could talk about later. But I'm interested to see what your crystal ball says about the future of trapping too. But
there was definitely times where I'm scratching my head thinking, what am I doing? This is ridiculous to stay in it, particularly when the fur boom crashed in the late 80s. And it was like somebody just automatically just shut the faucet off, and I tried, I was always in it. I stayed in it. I kept the business going. That's still all I did. I did try some other things to kind of help compensate for that. But yeah, we're always, and now we're rolling again. I mean, we have been for several years, but I mean, the trapping supply business is very important. So
that's awesome.
as far as the crystal ball, you want to get into that now?
Oh, well, first let's talk about
Justin.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like you a little bit. I didn't grow up around it. I was a sports guy, played basketball, baseball, football, the whole deal. Spent all my time at the park with buddies shooting hoops. And I'd go fishing and stuff with my dad, and I had uncles that would duck hunt and things like that, but I never went with them. And started dating Charlie's daughter in high school, and I was working this job at a warehouse trucking company, and they had beaver issues flooding out the parking lot. And the owner of the place was fed up with it and was like, I'll pay anyone X amount of dollars to get rid of these things because it's, causing chaos. And I'm like, I don't know how long I'd been with Henry, maybe a year.
Something like a year or whatever.
Yeah. And I was like, well, I know the guy, So I went and Charlie gave me a little DVD to watch, gave me just very few supplies. And I went originally for the money. I was in high school. Well, once it all went through the process and caught something, I was hooked. Like that was all it took. Caught a couple beavers, made some money. And
well, I'm curious because that's one thing that I love to home in on is that, especially as an adult, I remember very vividly my first catch. What was the setup for that beaver that Charlie got you on, like that, where you came up to it? Like, do you remember what you were actually feeling when you walked up to it outside of like, obviously this is going to help pay some bills or whatever it is as a senior in high school?
I was like, holy shit.
It worked.
But it was just a ditch, and I had made a couple different types of sets that I was learning about. So I put some 330 conibears in the narrow channels and tried to fence them in. Then I made kind of a drown setup, catch them by the foot, and they're supposed to go down to the line and drown with some heavy. Well, I underestimated the beaver. It broke off the weight and was actually on the bank. And so I was like, what am I gonna do? I got a live beaver right here. He's supposed to be dead. I'm in city limits. I don't have a gun with me or nothing. So, but yeah, it was wild. Then I ended up catching the other beaver in the 330 set, so that was, it was pretty cool. And I just started adding things and started when I'd worked there, I'd started in the winters, started setting stuff every night for mink or coons or whatever.
You got pretty lucky with a good mentor.
Yeah, yep. I started going out. Charlie was showing me how to trap coyotes in his own backyard in the cornfields back at the tornado house.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's kind of where I was
So,
learning it all.
so one thing I remember too with Justin, the first beaver, my daughter was with him and they caught it and it was still alive. And he's kind of like, what are we doing? They're kind of actually going through this emotional roller coaster about killing this beaver, which you relate to in your book. And I think that's a very healthy part of it. And I think if you don't go through that, then I kind of wonder about you. But so yeah, obviously it's part of it. It's not the reason you do it necessarily, but it's part of it. So anyways.
I think that was one thing that I think we collectively as, it still feels weird to say it, like podcasters, right? Not only podcasters, but podcasters who are talking about a subject that we love, that we want to see go on for generations. Now I want to see my kids, my grandkids, and how you talk about those things. Like it'd be so easy to just brush over and never talk about it, but finding the right tactful way to talk about it. And you're right, it's emotions. Like if you're a trapper who doesn't find some emotion in that act, like then you start to question a little bit. But I
Right.
would argue, at least the trappers I've met, which I've been fortunate to meet many over the past half a decade now, is the most compassionate people for animals, which again, for people who are anti-trappers, anti-hunters, it's so hard to conceive how somebody who harvests an animal, no matter the means, could love an animal so much. But I don't know if you guys have thought about that too. Like, how do you explain that to somebody?
I think about that a lot, and that is very difficult. I mean, that to really put that into words, and especially if you got the perspective of you're completely against it, or which I don't know that you'll ever be able to change that person's mind, But I think the it's pretty clear that the trapping side perspective with the development of best management practices with equipment that obviously that they tested that passed, et cetera, with all the things that we try to do for the benefit of the animal. I think that is clearly a good indication that our compassion for wildlife is alive and well, and it will continue to get better as things move forward, I think. So, but
Which is probably a good segue into the crystal ball question. Like, like with all of that, like you've been around, Charlie, with the ups and the downs. I would argue we're probably in a midpoint right now, just based on my understanding of the history of trapping, of like you could go one way or the other right now, and we see it little evidence of both, whether that's like New Mexico or, hopefully a win in Colorado coming up in November. But
right.
if you had to shake the magic 8 ball, what do you see as the future of trapping?
I okay. I'll answer that two ways.
Yeah.
I think that the interest in trapping right now is considering that we don't have a fur market, and I kind of I'm kind of like hesitant to even bring up the fur market because it really is secondary. So it's not really a driving force behind this whole thing now. There are people that still collect their fur and sell their fur to fur sale, and maybe meet the grown wool truck and sell their fur. But that's just kind of goes full circle. It's not that they're doing it driven by what they're going to receive, So guys may change their efforts a little bit with beavers being high. They, went after beavers, but overall, I just see that at this point, trapping is alive and well, and there's a lot of interest in it, like people like yourself that got into it later and are they're hooked on it, and that's just something they're going to do. So I think from that aspect, I think we're in great shape in terms of just the overall interest with within our small community. Unfortunately, it's I guess in a way we're glad that it's not just a giant community, but on the other aspect, it would be nice if it was maybe had a little more little more people, a few more people active in it. But as far as I think the other side of it, the all the scrutiny that we're under is clearly a bit of a dark cloud above us, um, and it's so difficult you can't, we've talked about this before on other podcasts, but you're not going to be able to reach that 10, 15% of whatever that their mind's made up. And that's in everything. I mean, there's always that group that you're just not going to change their mind, and on both ways. But that is definitely hangs over us. And I think a win in Colorado would be very significant. Just not that they mentioned bobcat trapping, it's cage trapping, but just the all out effort that they're taking there. And if the consumptive side of wildlife comes out on top of that, I think that kind of is going to set a precedent, take the wind out of their sails, and I think that'll mean a lot and go a long ways. You mentioned New Mexico, and that was definitely a terrible loss. And I think that only came down to like 1 or 2 votes. I mean, it was very close, and probably if maybe a little bit more time has been spent and maybe it wasn't, some of the stuff seemed like it was definitely maneuvered on behalf of, the other side. Maybe we would have come out on that one, if more time had been spent. But I guess to relate to that, I think it was 1985, Colorado lost the right to use foot traps. And, if you go back and you talk to those guys, if they're still around, a lot of them aren't even around anymore, but that worked on that. They felt like if they had another 30 or 60 days, they probably would have been victorious on that, because it was very close to here again. It was only like 1% or 2, if I remember correctly. It was a very close vote. We don't have ballot initiatives in Indiana, so, we don't have that hanging over our heads. But here in this state, the Colorado certainly is,
How do we collectively, change that? Like I have obviously a fresh perspective coming in where, my observation is the trappers I've met, a lot of them, like even myself wanting to go to the woods, solitary might not be the right word, but like, we do mind our own business.
right.
We do want to be left to our own devices in a lot of cases. So how, when the majority of our base are these people who are just like, just let me do my thing. Like, how do you start to spur that excitement outside of like new trappers coming in? You can say, join your association, be active, like what I was able to do. Like, how do we get the bulwark of our trappers to really get fired up and realize
protesters?
Yeah. I don't have a great answer for you other than, we just keep plugging away at it. When you consider that the two Fur Takers of America and the National Trappers Association combined have a membership of around 14,000 people, and a lot of that's overlap. So between the two, and then they estimate that around 200,000 trappers in the country, but it's pretty insignificant number of actual members. Mm-hmm. Here in Indiana, we're working on, they have, our legislature required our state to have a bobcat season starting in 2025 because the DNR, the NRC, Natural Resource Commission, was unsuccessful in the past. So anyways, that went through, the governor signed it. So we will have a bobcat season in 2025. Well, yeah. So the DNR is, I think, best case scenario, the ones that are doing all the rulemaking, all the parameters of the season. And so we're going through this open to public comment, which is just kind of the way it's done. And of course, the opposition we have a proposed quota, which is very conservative, 250 bobcats, and then the season's over. The starting.
Statewide.
I'm sorry?
That's statewide?
Yes. Well, it'll only be about half the state anyways, because
counties,
geographically, our northern counties don't have as many. So yeah, it's very conservative. So the opposition is, their main suggestion is to put the quota at 0 because it hasn't. So right now we're working through that, and we're trying to get as much obviously positive comments on the NRC Natural Resource Commission website to keep this, to keep at least this momentum going on our side. And clearly we've got more, again, to bring this full circle, we've got more people that are commenting positively that are are involved in a trapping organization. So at least we have that, so even though it may be purely selfish or whatever you want to call it, it's still a good thing in that, at least some of them have become proactive or active. So, but
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, like you said, those are the little windows in my mind of like that drive optimism.
Mhm.
It's very easy to see the mudslinging that can happen online, even within quote our own ranks,
Right.
right?
Right.
Which is silly with how small we are. But when you see those windows of people who might not be part of an organization but are still stepping up to the plate to try to leave commentary, positive commentary, especially on things that impact seasons, that's awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
now if we can just get everybody running the same direction, maybe we can have a little more longevity.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, it's something you mentioned, this solitary nature of trappers, which is generally something that most people do alone or maybe with a partner. And a lot of times with it's kind of been the nature of it. Certainly it was in the past, and very, solitary, independent, leave me alone. And that was more my generation. I think generally the younger guys are less likely to be like that, but there's a guy I can think very specifically. He's essentially the same age as myself, and we always have a Fur Takers of America fur sale here in Central Indiana. It's usually the first Saturday of March, and he was asking me about the sale, and I said, well, you can go on the sale. He goes, well, you have to be a member, and I said, it's like. It's just like, well, you got to be a member. It's like, well, join then. It's like,
But that's not even true.
yeah, you don't even have to be a member. You just got to pay twice the commission.
Yeah,
Um,
you can still go.
but here's this guy that's literally trapped as long as I can remember. I knew him when I was essentially a kid, and all the joy and all the just the outdoor enjoyment that he's had as a trapper, and he's like can't bring himself to just pay 40
30
bucks for a
bucks.
membership, just like, and somebody like that, you're probably never going to change their mind.
Yeah.
Maybe. I hope so, but
Yeah, it's an uphill battle, but I think it's one that's vital. And that was the thing that I struggled the most with, especially starting my own podcast, after listening to you guys. It's like, well, what do I have to say? Like, I have a finite window of experience, but at the same time, there is something to be said about getting voices out there that kind of cover the gamut, from Charlie to, you, Justin, who started a little later in life too, but then's been doing it full bore with great mentorship and, all coming around that common theme of joy. Like I could tell from talking to you and everybody I've had a guest on and every guest that I've heard on your podcast, it all stems from joy. It's a joyful thing to do.
right.
You get to be
Yep.
outside. You get to challenge yourself. You get your ass kicked by animals who are way smarter than you all the time. And you get to provide things like whether you decide to be the person who sells your fur, whether it's the person you want to try to tan stuff on your own and make cool stuff. Like it's I wouldn't say a limitless opportunity, but it's pretty wide. Like you can go down any path you want and be as involved or not involved in the entire process as you want to be and still find joy along the way, which is
Right.
awesome.
Right. And that daily and like your guys that you met in town, it forces you are the best outdoorsman.
Mhm.
As far as
Yeah.
you're being out there, you're out there every day, you're seeing stuff that most people aren't going to get to see, and you're going to deal with a lot of times if you hunt, and the weather's absolutely terrible, you probably aren't going to go. Well, if you're trapping, you're going. You don't have a
You have
choice.
to.
So, um, so yeah, you're experiencing and doing a lot of things that a lot of outdoorsmen don't necessarily fully experience. So it's one thing too that's changed over time is in my earlier years, like of course fur prices were high and people it was a different perspective for sure. But they still enjoyed it. It was a lot of work. It's still a lot of work if it was just about the money, so but you would literally set a trap the first day of season and you would be running traps. Of course, you were moving to different locations, but you were running traps the entire 60, 75 days of the season, essentially. Nowadays, it's guys just trap when they're able to, trap when they, they're off work or Thanksgiving break, Christmas break, or a specific vacation, So and I think those guys are probably having a better time and enjoying themselves more than, the guys that were just pushing really hard.
Yeah, but you know what's interesting about that point? I got in recreationally, right? And it evolved every season, right? More critters, maybe try to sell some, maybe do some stuff with it. But what was interesting to me, and just another hat tip for people who are thinking about getting into it, like it's an actual skill that you can use.
Yeah.
Well, personally, last year, I always still had one foot in like the corporate world and my outdoors life. I was working remote, still had my day job, was doing my little Zoom meetings in between stuff. But last May, not this past May, but the May before, I was part of my first ever layoff. I thought I was kind of impervious to that at some point, but I had my first layoff. And, we had our little, like, I call it like suburban standards where like you have 6 months of savings in the bank and that's what we had. And we're like, we're good. All of a sudden 6 months went up and I still didn't have a new job. And I don't have a trade skill. I don't have like anything else to fall back on. So when my back got against the wall, I went to trapping. And it was completely fortunate that by the time that 6 months ran out, it was going into trapping season. And last trapping season was the first season where I made that switch. And I'm saying that because people listening, like you can do it recreationally and flip the switch to really push, and you can actually make money in trapping, or vice versa. You can start that way and also go to recreational. But like I paid our mortgage for 3 months on trapping. I got lucky. Like I got an AFWA contract to do some BMP testing for live trapping marten. I got, had a pretty good beaver run, and last year the beaver prices were up. But, I'm very thankful for trapping and kind of feel like God brought that to me in the past where, I had that guy put his arm around me and say, come on, son, sit down. Let me tell you about trapping, not knowing that those 4 or 5 years leading up to losing my job would actually put me in a position where I had enough of a skill to try to make ends meet for my family. And frankly, getting into it, I never thought I'd be in that position, but I was. And I'm very thankful for trapping to be able to provide that for me. Now, I joke with my wife, like if you look at those 3 months that I paid her mortgage with trapping, the hours spent, like if you did the math on what my like hourly pay would be,
right.
like ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it worked. And like I just want to give that hat tip to people who are thinking about it too. Like there's opportunity for trapping too, like if you want that or need it. So there's other tertiary benefits outside of just joy, which it also provides that too.
Right. So you do have the advantage of probably a better quality fur than what we have in Indiana, generally speaking. But a lot of guys here will they'll start at the whether it be part-time or full-time off of their trapping experience, a nuisance business, where they're catching raccoons or beavers or whatever for people, and that pays pretty well. So yeah, it is something that skill gives you that ability to go do that. So
I think people forget that it's a skill.
Yeah.
Like it is a society beneficial skill. Like again, this is from my perspective because I didn't grow up around it. That it blows my mind. Like you'd see nuisance control vehicles, you'd see these things, but those are skilled trappers. And when you think about society as it is today, there's always going to be a need. There's always going to be human wildlife conflict. And, it's funny to me that anti-trappers, anti-hunters kind of gloss over that. Like, it's not okay to do it recreationally, even though in the recreational aspect, you're probably actually taking better care of the animal and using it to its fullest potential.
Right.
versus control work, which sometimes you're not, but largely you are. But that will never go away. Like there's
That's right.
always going to be a oil company, well, even a strip mall that's having beavers flood their parking lot, and you need to take care of it. And
Right.
that's just something that's not talked about a lot.
Right. Right. And it's like, yeah, exactly. And it's, I think I heard on a Meat Eater or whatever with Dan Gates, and he was explaining, the state of California, they did away with mountain lion hunting a number of years ago, killed about 300 mountain lions a year. Well, now the state evidently kills about the same number of mountain lions on a control basis,
And tosses them.
Exactly. Before there was be provided income to the state, not just through licenses, but all the people that, stayed in hotels, ate out, did all the things, paid them outfitter, all the different things that brought in. So, it's just, but
What about you, Justin? What's your magic 8 ball say about the future of trapping?
Just like what you're saying, it will always be here because of the conflict. It's just gonna change, I think. And it has since even I've been around trapping 20 years now. So when I got in it, it's already completely different. I could see the gradual changes. Um, but it will always be here. I think it's a good industry to be in. But it's just going to go ebb and flow and change, and we'll work around it. People will figure out ways, and it it'd be interesting to see where we are in 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
I'll still be over here in this corner mountain deer and pouring lure or something.
I have respect for you guys as taxidermists. Part of that, when I lost my job, I went and apprenticed at a taxidermy shop because I wanted to get better at fur handling and just
right.
everything as it relates to it, which is a great opportunity to do that. But my God, I do not have the artistry in me. I found out. I mean, I can skin a bear like the best of them, but that's about it. Mounting and you know, oh man, you guys are doing the Lord's work with making such beautiful things like that because that's a true talent, not just a skill, but a talent.
I we always say that we feel like it's more of a skilled trade. There
Yeah.
is obviously art mixed into it, especially like if you're creating a habitat base or something. But as
Mhm.
far as like, for instance, mounting a deer, that's probably what most people do. It's a monotonous step by step thing
Yeah,
to
yeah.
do all the time, and it's not a lot of art to it.
Well, I'll argue against you on that, not because I don't agree, because I do. I think it is like a more like a skilled trade. However, even in that monotony, like what I was realizing is I thought, just like I thought about trapping, you take a form off the shelf, you plop some antlers in it, you throw the hide over it, you sew it up, and stuff some clay in the eyes, and you're good to go. But you throw that wet hide over there, and all of a sudden you're like, well, this form's quarter inch off. Now you're cutting the form in half, doing your own foam, getting your
Right.
duct tape out, fill like that's where I'm saying, like, yes, it's probably the more you do, the more it's a little bit rope, but there's still like so much like nuance there to have a good mount versus an okay mount. And I think that's important too to highlight.
Yeah, that is true. And a lot of times it's like taxidermy slash troubleshooting because usually it's the troubleshooting seems like, once you have this certain amount of baseline, it's just working through, of course, you obviously you have to take the animal from the wild, so you got to shoot it.
Yep.
And, so there's issues with that. And of course, there's issues with improper field care, and there's issues with maybe a specific animal has certain character,
Like an
not
antelope
yeah
sheds terribly.
yeah like a
So,
non yeah or
there's deal with that.
there's ones that just have not typically normal characteristics that might throw another wrench into it or whatever. So but yeah, but
Yeah, I loved my time there. That was an amazing learning experience and just kind of like trapping, making you a better hunter. If you can apprentice or work in a taxidermy shop, talk about like, I'm never going to be the top lot guy, I'll tell you that much, but just getting a little bit more time under the knife
yeah,
with their thing like that, that's invaluable. Even for just being a big game hunter too. I always talking to Randy Newberg, and we were talking about how when he's out hunting with somebody, he can always tell who's a trapper versus just a hunter, because when that knife work starts, it's a different ball game.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It was interesting back. This would have been in the 80s. We used to go to the first sale in Toronto, Canada. And that was back when it was prior. They had the name change of North American Fur Auction. So back then it was under the Hudson Bay Company. So, which is pretty cool to say that I attended a sale under the name of Hudson Bay Company. But anyways, the Canadian put up fur, which all of it's on display there in sample lots. So you can go look at any of the lots that are listed in the catalog, and you can actually go pull the sample and look through it. And obviously it's by different sections and species and all of that. And the Canadian put up fur was generally much better put up than the American fur. I mean, I think maybe just because the days are long or the nights are longer and it's colder, and it was more just that. Not that we don't have it here, but I think just that general tradition of that coming down the line as a trapper, and then of just perpetuated through the family. We have Justin from, I can't think of his last name, from Canada was on the podcast. I originally met him at the Trappers College at Fur Takers Trappers College. Anyways, he learned to fur handling from his grandma, because it was just within that family, and she was, while her husband trapped and whatever, she was responsible to putting up the fur at home, so. But,
Yeah, I'm working on that with my wife. She is the best beaver hooper. So I'm very excited about that. But yeah, man, that tradition and the everything around fur handling, like that passing down the generational thing, that's so important to me now, as essentially a first generation trapper. But hearing those stories is so empowering, and gives me more motivation to do what we're doing, which is getting a voice out there for trapping, and
right.
hopefully that in a positive way for the long term.
I think it's just, when I grew up with it, that was just what you did. So when you caught something that evening, you skinned it and scraped it and stretched and dried it. Maybe not so much nowadays. And there's definitely that segment of trappers that just want to go completely full circle. A lot of them will just skin them and freeze them flat and sell them that way, which is fine. I'm just glad they're still doing it, but that idea of just the fur handling, and that's got a lot of satisfaction to it. And back when you got all your fur shed and you got all your fur in there, and you just go out there and you look at it or whatever, and then you sell it, and it's like, well, it was kind of like, it's kind of cool to get the check, but then again, it was just always kind of sad to not go out there and just have all that stuff hanging there. It was just kind of that, I don't know. It was part of it, but so.
What was the first thing you ever trapped?
A red fox.
Red fox? And how long did it take you to skin it?
Well, it took me about a month and a half to trap it first, because that thing was way smarter than me, pulling my pan covers and flipping my trap over. But I remember, I had a little gambrel. I had a knife that wasn't that sharp, and you had just had Stu on from Coon Creek. I had his little tutorial on an iPad on a chair as I was trying to do this fox, and it had to have taken me every bit of 2 hours to do it. And I did pretty good until I got it on the fleshing beam and then ripped a hole. It was like that thing where I was like, oh man, this skinning thing, time consuming, but easy. And then of course, put it on the fleshing beam and not really knowing my, butt from my elbow, just sliced it right down the middle. So,
yeah, they're pretty thin skinned, which you found out. So yeah.
Oh yeah. Very much so.
Yeah.
That story I was talking about when I first trapped a beaver at where I was working. I brought it over here, and I laid it out. I was going to skin it, and I think it took me 3.5 hours. But I got it done. I tanned it, and it is a pillow that is still in my at my house. I've got a beaver pillow, my very first beaver.
And that's going to last. Like one of the things that I've talked a lot about with like some of the guys like New England Naturals, like, as wokey as it sounds, that is the most renewable resource that we have. Like that thing will last for your kids, their kids, as long as they want to pass it on. But beforehand, and then if someone gets tired of it, they can toss it, and it's
Yeah.
biodegradable. It's the ultimate renewable resource. It's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. He's got a great little 30-second thing about, he hates um, fake fur, and, just gives this full circle explanations, and, and it's just spot on, so, but,
So I got to ask. So, I mean, I have a bevy of questions I ask all of my guests, but I want to ask at least this one to both of you. As sportsmen, as people who are hunters and trappers, but people who spend a lot of time out in the field because of trapping. What's the wildest thing you've ever encountered outside or outdoors? Whether it be hunting, trapping, hiking. To seed it, I've heard everything from aliens, Bigfoot to, you know, non-target catch releases. It runs the gamut.
I got two. I mean, I was deep sea fishing a couple of years ago, and I saw a manta ray, and I thought that was wild. I mean, they're so big.
Yeah, how
Uh,
big is it?
but one of the coolest thing, you mentioned Louisiana. I used to go down there and catch gators for about 9 years before COVID hit. I haven't been down since, but I'd go every season, at least for a long weekend, and catch a few. And I remember being in the marsh, it was in brackish water, and I was pulling up a gator, and behind me there was dolphins jumping. And I just
Wow.
thought, this ecosystem was just amazing what could be there all at the same time. Like here I am with this giant reptile, and that's going on behind me. It was chasing they were dragging for shrimp, and it
Oh,
was
wow.
collecting up behind it. But I just thought that was wild. Those
Yeah,
are
that's
the
pretty cool.
things that I
yeah.
think. So.
What about you, Charlie?
I guess there's been so many of it over the years that you kind of just, um, I don't know.
That's as far as like animal encounters I
Yeah,
go.
as far as animal encounters, yeah.
That's what I was thinking. But
Well,
Just,
I think you got a pretty good mix, Justin. You got the animal encounters plus like the awe-inspiring essence of nature, right? Like you got
yeah,
dolphins jumping behind you, you got a big however many foot gator and between your knees. That's pretty
yeah,
dang.
yeah.
I mean, of course, you always remember all your first, your first catches and all that. I remember one morning just going out, I'd always check traps before school. So obviously it was dark. When I got on the bus, it was still dark. So it was leaving at 4 or 4:30 in the morning. I remember this is not particularly awe-inspiring or anything. It was just like circumstances, but which is a lot of times is what stuff is. And it was super foggy out. And I remember going back, and I got to where it was like probably a half a mile from where we live, and I was walking, and it was very, very foggy. And by the time, and I thought I was going the right direction, and I actually ended up going straight east, and I ended up on this other road, on Franklin Road.
Yeah.
Just stuff like that. And of course, I relate this crazy story when I was a fur buyer, and I head out to Pennsylvania. My brother-in-law is driving the truck, and he decides to hit an ice patch and rolls the truck, and tires are sticking up straight in the air. We're crawling out the windows, and coons were falling out the back of the truck, and just that was one of those ones where wrecker came, flipped back over, made sure we were okay on fluids, and went and sold the raccoons and drove home. And of course, when one door didn't open, and the other one we had to go crawl through, just stuff like that. Of course, all the mechanical issues and just getting stuck in pure quicksand, and we were in New Mexico, and we drove through this one area one day. The next day there was enough snow melt up high that it would seep down in there and would literally just bury the truck to the frame. And I don't just all that stuff like that is just over the years. As far as
It's a life outdoors, it's a
yeah,
collection of
yeah,
all these things that suburbanites like I used to be would never experience, which is
yeah.
awesome.
Or just seeing a giant buck, or I don't know, and it's, that kind of stuff is always just completely unexpected. You just see it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of some great story to tell you, but I guess
It will be when we catch a mountain lion or something.
yeah. Well, that's definitely on our bucket
We're
list.
going for it.
So did you
Yeah.
ever catch a wolf?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. This past season. So yeah, for those in the book did not end with my success on
Right.
the line, but yeah, it's
You
took me
gotta write another book. It's
I
gonna
know.
be the
Yeah.
follow-up.
Well, we
I
should have
know.
been up to date on your podcast, I guess.
Yeah.
Assuming you've talked about it.
Oh, there. So I don't know if you can see that, but that's the first one that I trapped right there. That's the skull.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
Yeah, I see it back here.
yeah, but yeah, it took me 3 years. And I've had a little bit of success, and this season's gonna be hopefully a good season, but yeah, it's effort and time on
Yeah.
all fronts, right? And wolves have turned out to be, for me, the most difficult, which I think holds true for a lot of people, just on the spectrum of canines. Like coyotes whoop me, the red fox whoop me. Now, wolves are doing the same thing, but we did finally connect and, have some success. And I attribute a lot of that to the podcast and getting to meet guys like Justin Webb, Paul Anzac, and wolfers essentially, right? And talking to people up in Canada. And that's helped me kind of home in my strategies, not singular, because I've had to try a little bit of everything and deal with educating them and,
Yeah.
having to eat crow essentially because I've screwed it up for myself in a lot of instances. But yeah, we finally did connect, which was awesome.
Well, good deal. In talking with Paul and Zach, we did a podcast with him, but then he's one of the instructors at the Trappers College now, so I'll spend the week with him. But he's like, wolf trap, it's actually pretty boring because there's so many days that you don't catch anything. You're just looking strictly at empty traps. It might go 2 weeks or whatever, and then of course you have a really good day. But I think it sounds to me like it's just got to have that continual drive to just keep going after him. So
Well, that and the thing that really turned the tide for me, if we're talking tactical things with wolves, is that boring nature. Like I would have traps out and, I'd go 9, 10 days. And when I was first starting, I only had so many traps, let's say a half a dozen. And I'd have them in these areas. And then I'd go 9, 10 days. And my thought was, okay, this is dead. They're not coming back. Let me take these traps up and move them somewhere else. And, the advice I finally got that helped was like, just don't move your steel.
Right.
Like if you think if it's a good area and it's a good set, don't move it. And of course, that's what would happen. Like then I'd go 23, almost 30 days and then have a hit.
Yeah.
With the patience. So not moving steel just to move steel, like that patience aspect, like it's mostly boring and your daily checks are like depressing, but eventually you got to just leave that steel on the ground, and that helped a lot.
Yeah. I mean, there would be nothing worse than moving your setup and then finding out that, you just missed them where you were originally.
Well, that's what would happen without fail. It's like I'd move them and then like I'd go and pull a game camera or go back and look, and like the next day they're just tracks everywhere. I'm like, really? Like, God's playing with me. But yeah, I mean, gentlemen, this has been great. I mean, I do have to run here in a little bit to pick up some kiddos, but
Oh yeah.
So one quick question, Zach. So if you guys in Idaho, are you under all the scrutiny? I'm assuming you're not, that Montana is, or are you guys staying clear of that, or?
Oh, I've got time for this.
Okay.
I was actually just talking to Justin Webb from Foundation for Wildlife Management on Friday, but here's how it kind of went down. Like last year, and I'm sure you might have talked to Paul about this, but in Montana, there was a lawsuit filed for closing down the tail end of Montana's wolf trapping season, with the argument that in wolf traps you could trap and restrain a grizzly bear.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately that passing is not the right word, but it was pushed. And so the trappers lost like a month on the end, which was spring, like when they would think bears would come out of hibernation. And on the other end of the spectrum, they were pushing to have the season start a month later to ensure that bears were denned up so that there's no grizzly bear wolf trapper conflict. Putting aside all of just the facts around that just not being true.
Right.
It happened. And when it did happen last year, myself, and I think a lot of people, and I'm not speaking for Idaho Trappers Association, I'm very involved and I love all those guys. I think we all just kind of thought it wasn't going to happen here. Like it happened there, but it's not going to happen here. And maybe people were abreast to it and I wasn't. I'm not like elbow deep in the legislature all the time, but essentially what happened very next year, that same lawsuit got brought into Idaho. And we were lucky, I'm lucky, in that it cut the state in half, meaning like the kind of northern and southeastern where there's grizzly habitat, it had the same issue where it cut the season, pushed the season back from a start date and cut it short for about half the state of Idaho. And where I'm at, thankfully, I was on the border where there was no impact for me in my trapping season. But a lot of the really gangbuster type of trappers going after wolves were impacted, and where our wolf population is the most dense happens to correlate with where grizzly are. So it talking with Justin, like there's a lot of hurry up and wait right now. Like we have a lot, like both Idaho Trapper Association, Foundation for Wildlife Management, National Trapper Association, FTA, are all pooling and putting in funds to fight the lawsuit. And we're kind of waiting in the wings right now, but as far as I'm aware, that is still holding for this upcoming season for at least half of Idaho and of course Montana too, where those seasons are cut short for something logically that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
Where evidence would suggest it shouldn't.
Yeah.
I
guess, I mean, generally a lot of this stuff doesn't make complete sense anyways. It's just kind of.
Well, you don't think the wolves needed to go back to Colorado? I'm sure that horse has been beaten quite a bit, but
and of course Colorado creates their own issue because they probably don't have any type of management plan. They don't have, certainly not going to be using foot traps to control those wolves at some point. So it's kind of like you guys are kind of getting what you set yourself up for, or deserve in a way, so, but
neither here nor there.
That's
but
wild.
That's another subject, I guess.
That's a whole nother podcast, man.
We might have to do a part two. I would enjoy that for sure. But gentlemen, I really appreciate it. Is there anything else that I can answer for you guys? You answered all my.
No, you hit us with what's the coolest thing or wildest thing you've ever seen.
So what's yours?
Let's hear that before we jump off.
Very recent, actually. It was 4 weeks ago.
Sasquatch.
Two of them. Yeah, they help now. I wish. I want to believe so bad. I have so many people up here that do believe, and not in my.
I'm telling everyone listening, quit wasting your time. That stuff is a joke.
I want to believe
not real.
But equally pants soiling experience for me, at least. 4 weeks ago, it was the start of in early September. I didn't have an archery elk tag. I do for late season, but not early season in September. So I was going to just do muzzleloader deer, started September 8th. So a buddy of mine went out. He had his muzzleloader tag too. And first day of the season, first light, beautiful doe walks right in front of us. It's like, oh, well, this is very convenient. So shoots the doe. We gut it, field dress it, and, do everything, take it back to the house, process the meat. Well, the next day I had planned, because I run bait barrels, to go bear hunting. And he had already filled his tag. I'm like, I'd rather shoot a bear right now. I prefer bear meat, all of that. So that's what we were going to do. So first light, we walk out of my cabin. And now my cabin, I'm very fortunate that we opened to 3,000 acres of public land. So I can just walk right out my back door. So we walk back to where that deer was, because it was kind of on the way to my bait barrels, a couple miles out. And I was like, let's just go see if anything's hit that. And sure enough, like we go out and walk a while. And we start hearing that, rawr, rawr. I'm like, it kind of sounded like a mountain lion. I thought it was a mountain lion. But we kind of crest this hill to look down where that gut pile was left. And we see two bears, two beautiful bears. One, probably 2 to 3 year old sow, and another boar that was like 300, 350 pounds, which was odd that they were together anyways. But they were kind of circling and fighting over some of the gut pile. And, I just want to observe. I'm like, okay, let's make sure there's no cubs, anything like that. So we're about 150 yards above them, looking down like a 5% grade, tons of cover and foliage, but clear shooting lanes. So I have my rifle sitting across my lap and we're just watching. And talked to my buddy who was kind of sitting back over here over my left shoulder. He just had his pistol. And I'm like, well, let's see what this is. I'd like to shoot that big boar. Let's just watch. And the wind was in our favor, right in our face. And within a second, the wind switched and our scent went straight downhill. And in my head, like I've been around a lot of black bears in the last several years and done a lot of bear hunting. And I actually put my rifle on safety when the wind switched because I was like, the second that it hits them in like 5 seconds, their heads are going to lift up and they're going to boogie out and bolt. Well, it happened that way. The wind went downhill and we saw both of their heads pop up and look directly at us. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that was a really cool experience. We'll go sit the barrels, whatever. They're out. In a split second, that sow took off at a dead run right at us, huffing and puffing and growling. Like she was 200 pounds, but like
Yeah.
that was big. And then the boar was following her. So thankfully, like, you always think like maybe as a trapper or a new hunter, maybe again, this is ego. You always think about what would happen in that scenario, and you always kind of picture yourself doing the right thing. Oh, I'd stand up and do this. Well, thankfully, it kind of happened in that way. Like my instinct was to stand up and take my rifle off safety and yell "Hey bear" as loud as I could. And when I yelled "Hey bear," they were full clip running up at us, closing a 150-yard gap. The boar cut off to my right, his left, kind of ran off, but that sow never stopped. And thankfully, she had a white patch on her chest. And I pulled my rifle up and shot her right through the chest, through the heart, out the back shoulder, and dropped her. Which I've only ever archery hunted bear before that, so I was kind of expecting her to run off, but that 300 Win Mag did its job and plopped her down. And I tell you, I almost crapped my pants. Like she was 25, 30 yards from me when I hit her. And if like I'm not a great shot, like you put me out on the range, like I'll be okay. I overthink things, but in the moment it worked and I just put it right on the mark and dropped her. And then the other one started circling around. So we had to just kind of like be loud, run them off. I'm still not sure if the one in front of me is, passed away or not. So it was just this absolutely hair-raising moment that I never thought I'd experience. And, when you're walking out your back door with no expectation or,
Right.
thought about it, like, man, like we both went back to the house after that and we looked at it like, what just happened? Like intense and awe-inspiring and really cool. But, had I not, like that bear was, she was going to run through me for sure. And not a huge bear. I'll send you guys a picture, like 200, maybe a little more pounds. But man, those First Light pants are in the trash now.
That's hilarious.
That's
That's a wild one.
that's a good way to round this out. So yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, guys. Well, I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. I appreciate the podcast genuinely. You guys were a big inspiration for me. I appreciate it. I appreciate everything I've learned from you guys, even though you didn't know you were teaching me.
Well, thank you, and yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Keep
I'd
it up on
appreciate it.
there.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
spreading the word positive light in the trapping world. We need as many as we can. So
yeah, I appreciate what you're doing for sure. So very important. So
Awesome.
as you
We'll
said,
catch
it's a
you all
small
next time.
community. So
It is.
all right, Zach. Well, we'll catch you next time. And
yeah, we'll do this again.
yeah.
So.
Perfect.